And welcome to the first of a new era in the Anglo-Italian pod as we have a big interview. And from now on, listeners, our interviews are going to be released as individual episodes. So make sure to keep an eye out on our social medias. You know, the Twitters, the Instagrams, your
Yeah.
TikToks. Make sure to keep an eye out because we will be releasing a string of interviews and just they'll be popping up, so keep an eye out. As always, my name is Rory, and I'm joined by my very good friend,
Adam. So, Rory, let's talk about this particular episode. It was kind of a really fun one to do as well. But yeah, let's start off by it's the Marshall Islands. So, Marshall Islands, was that named after Ian Marshall?
I believe so. From my research that I
Oh, I
conducted, that's what came
see.
up on Wikipedia. That's what came up on Wikipedia. So that is the truth. Yeah, as you have said, we are going to be talking to or about the Marshall Islands, and we have an interview with Lloyd Owers, who is the head of development at the Marshall Islands FA, as they have their campaign to become a member of FIFA. They are the last, I'm going to say, independent recognized nation that are not a member of FIFA. So this is their campaign to get recognized so that they can start taking part in the Oceania Games, start taking part in FIFA competitions, in OFC competitions, and get football onto that island. As you'll hear in the interview, I think it's a fascinating interview. Lloyd is an absolute legend. We've been chatting ever since on Twitter. The guy's a hero. Really, really interesting interview. And I love this guy's story and the job he's trying to do. Like, Adam, we try and do a bit for, like, you know, the underdogs, the smaller teams. Like, I feel like this is a big one. I'm happy about this.
This is quite a massive one, and just from my kind of listening of this particular episode, it was quite unique. Learning about Lloyd's kind of journey, that was quite mesmerizing in terms of where that took him, but more importantly, how he came across this kind of opportunity and then blossomed with it. And I'm not going to spoil it for those watching and listening because that would kill it. But all I can say is make sure you watch it or listen to it till the very end because it was fascinating. And kudos to you, mate. It was a very good interview. So make sure you watch and listen.
Why, thank you. But before we continue to blow smoke up each other's asses, we are going to let the listeners and viewers watch the interview. Guys, enjoy. And welcome to the Anglo-Italian pod. As always, my name is Rory, and this week we are very excited to welcome on a technical director of a national federation. We're going up in the world, guys, and this country with a population of around 60,000 people, based around more islands than you can count. We are, of course, talking about the Marshall Islands out in the Pacific Ocean. And to join us, we have Lloyd Owers. Lloyd, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fantastic. Thank you for having us on.
No, we are, like, honestly, my co-host wanted to be here, but since we've had this one lined up, we've all been pretty excited about it. So to give a quick introduction, long-time listeners will know that we have interacted with Paul Watson in the past, and we've been kind of keeping an eye out on the smaller nations in the world that are trying to get involved in FIFA. And when this came up on my Twitter timeline, I thought this has to be something we got involved in. And this is, of course, the Marshall Islands campaign to become part of FIFA. Now, they were proud, I'm going to say proud to say, the only independent nation without being a member of FIFA, but this is now changing or due to change. And Lloyd, you are a big part of this. Tell us kind of briefly before we go into your career what the idea is and what the job is and how it's going.
Yeah, so it is very random. It's very unique. And when you say about pride of being the last nation on earth, there is a sense of pride because it's a selling point. It's a unique fact. But at the same time, it comes with why are we the last nation on earth? So there's a bit of a both sides to the story. In terms of myself, yeah, I've come in as the technical director. I was fortunate enough to get into place just before Christmas and start some of the process then. I have since been joined by a couple of guys that unfortunately are unnamed at the moment. They will announce themselves at some point shortly, and they are looking after a lot of the media, so social media and fundraising, sponsorship, those aspects. But collectively, yeah, it's a case of really driving the program. And starting from the ground up. So, you know, we don't have any form of structure for the game across the country. So it is really, really starting from the bottom up, and with very, very little equipment, little kit. So yeah, it's definitely a case of raising awareness to the program itself, or the project itself.
Well, hopefully we can help you in that, and we will definitely be keeping an eye out on this process as it goes along the coming years, I imagine. But before we get into how the opportunity came and what you're having to do, let's talk about your career within football. So you're a qualified coach, played semi-professional yourself. How did you get into football? Was it always a passion, like family? How did you get into it?
Yeah, my dad was a massive football fan. I think family influences. Everyone is just very football based and watching, playing, whatever it was. So as soon as I was old enough to kick a ball, I was sort of, you know, kicking a ball. And 5 years old, I was always there and thereabouts watching Chelsea, which is at the current times not the best, but you know, we've had some good success. But I remember being a kid, and it wasn't then. It's very similar to now. So
yeah. It kind of feels like back in the old days for you, I imagine. Yeah.
But yeah, and it just developed from there. So obviously, I kept involved in football all the way through. I was at Colchester United in some capacity as a player up until about 15, 16, and then moved into semi-professional football. But at the same time, I left school and realised that college wasn't really for me at that point, and that was in the stage where you didn't have to stay on until 18. You could leave at 16. So I did, and I went into coaching and worked as a community coach for Colchester United. And yeah, then the next thing is I, at 23-ish, something like that, I went to work for the FA. It's more as a coach education capacity. And then I was fortunate enough to connect with people that took me out to Canada. So I had the opportunity to deliver coach education workshops on a consultancy basis out there. Team-based coaching, that took me to the USA for a little spell, doing the same sort of stuff in terms of coach education and team-based coaching. Wow. Came back, and yeah, I worked for, I realized I wasn't going to go back to Essex. I wanted to go somewhere else, and with my role for the FA, I was based in Oxfordshire, so I went back to Oxfordshire and worked for Oxford United, and then had random little spells within Sweden as well. So
wow.
Yeah, coach consultancy work again, and also working as an opposition analyst for a club in Sweden. And then
there's quite a big connection between Scandinavia and, like, there's quite a lot of English coaches, English players that go out to Scandinavia and kind of play in Sweden, Iceland, Norway. Like, how was that experience? I feel like is quite a common pathway, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, for me, I wasn't there in terms of permanently or I was very regularly, but not permanently, if that makes sense. So I would go over and do coach consultancy work, but I would also do a lot of the opposition scouting, for example, was video analysis. So in terms of now, it's massive where COVID's hit, and a lot of analysts working remotely and stuff like that. And this was before then, and it was for an English coach called Stuart Gibson, who's been in Sweden for 30 odd years now and played there, coached there, lived there ever since, and yeah, he still works in the game. So I still speak to Stuart. He's a great guy in terms of giving me that experience. But that led me back to experiences here. So I worked as a first team scout for Mansfield. And then more recently, I've gone back into like the coaching managing side, where I was at Oxford City more recently. And and now obviously with the Marshall Islands.
It's quite the CV, I'll be honest. But you also said you spent a bit of time in Canada, and I just want to quickly visit that as well, because Canada now is like a huge emerging market for like soccer or football. We saw them qualify for the World Cup for the first time since the 70s, I want to say.
Yeah, 50s. It was, yeah.
Like, it feels,
years, I believe.
Yeah, it feels like now, like, could you see it when you were there that there's a big base of kind of footballing talent there, or athletic talent that was there to be mined? Because I feel like they could almost overtake the US at some point in terms of talent.
I mean, for me, Canada's had a massive influence on myself personally and professionally. So the first time I went over was 2012, and that was when London were hosting the Olympics. So I was over there when Canada knocked out Team GB. So it was a random one, because I was, delivering coach education workshops to Canadians, And then also you've got kids there that are watching or being parts of sessions that I do after.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, I'm getting stick from kids because Canada have beat us. And this was in the stage where, like, this is, female game. And even now, female game in Canada is massive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously massively growing here as well, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in terms of the game collectively now, it's absolutely booming. And I think there were signs then that it was going in the right way. There's so much infrastructure for the game.
Mm-hmm.
Every province is really well governed, and every province is really well populated in terms of soccer. So I'm not surprised that it's boomed the way it has, and especially with John Herban is fantastic that he's an English connection to it. And yeah, I'm not surprised it's taken off the way it has, and I honestly think it's going to continue to be that way. And on a personal level, it's somewhere that I'd love to go back to, and that my wife and I have plans to go there at some point in terms of that's where we want to be. So yeah, personally and professionally, it's had a massive impact on me.
Nice. Yeah, I've got family in Canada. I've been lucky enough to visit, and it really is an incredible country. And I'm really happy to see them, because I think North America, that with America and Canada, the second they put money into a sport, they're going to be good at it. You look at their college programs with NFL, baseball, basketball, whatever it is, they do it well. So the second they have interest and they think they can do well at it, they're just going to pile money into it. So 100%. I think we're definitely going to see them continue to grow. But
definitely, the World Cup's going to be massive. 2026. It's going to be really, really key because obviously both countries are hosting it alongside Mexico, and it's going to be massive, that whole North American region.
Yeah, and it'll be weird to see Mexico potentially be the worst team out of those three as well. It's going to be quite strange. It's going to be quite strange.
Could well happen.
But then from there, so moving on from there, you kind of set up a website to kind of showcase your coaching ideas and what you were trying to do. Do you think this is the new way for people to kind of get into the industry? I see a lot of people kind of showcasing their scouting work or their analytics work on Twitter, online. Do you think, is this where the industry is going now? Is this where recruiters are looking?
I mean, for me, I've always been quite keen on, it's more so Twitter, to be honest, for myself. And it always has been. And that is actually where the first chance for me to go to Canada came from. It was just me putting out a tweet that was, I was working as a community coach at the time. I put out a tweet and it was a case of, I've got the summer off, any opportunities to go anywhere to coach. And a guy came back and we ended up connecting, and he was over in the UK really, really locally to me randomly about 2 months later. So we met up for a bit of food, and it just spiraled on, and we've really still good mates now, both big part of each other's weddings and all sorts Nice. And then, so they're linking that to that, now, for example, I've always put session plans on my Twitter account and I've tagged people into it and whatever from there. But I realized that I was studying a master's degree in coaching, and it came to an end last year. But when I was getting towards the back end of it, I realized once I stopped doing it, I was going to miss writing. I was going to miss being in that process of the game, not just coaching, not just, analyzing game, whatever it was. I realized that I quite enjoyed writing about it and talking about it as well. And I realized I was going to miss that quite a lot. So once it did finish, I needed to fill that void with something, and that was a case of and that was just a case of, well, I'll start a blog site and see what happens. So it had weekly session plans, articles that I'd write, and Q&As with people around the world, and that spiraled a lot quicker than I thought it would. People were looking at it, and it was good. So and that's really where this process started. And like you said, is that where people are looking? I genuinely think so. I think social media is massive now, and I think if people use it in the right way, then they can really showcase what their aims are. And for me, it was just a case of wanting to continue talking about football in a different way and writing, but I also wanted to help people in some way. So if I put up a session plan on a Wednesday, for example, if it got 100 views and it helped one person, then I've helped one person. You know what I mean? It was that aspect. I wanted to help someone. So that's where it came from. But I genuinely do believe that if you do it right, and I think people will start to benefit themselves in their own careers from that.
Nice. Yeah, it does feel that way. I see a lot of people on Twitter with like the scouting reports and stuff, and it does feel like
Yeah.
there's now a kind of a whole new market out there, a whole new way of accessing that market. But as
Yeah.
you kind of alluded to, this is how the opportunity came. And I believe it was Samoa that kind of approached you or started talking to you. Now, this is a country that they've had a documentary made about themselves. Next Goal Wins, right? It was American Samoa.
So that was American Samoa, and that was a really, really great documentary. And to be honest, I've actually been trying to look into it to see the similarities and how we can contact people that are involved in it, because it's so many similarities to what we're doing. But this other one was actually from the other Samoa.
Okay.
And it was me chasing them. So so like I said, I do weekly Q&As with people from around the world. It could be coaches, analysts, recruitment staff, whatever it might be. So I got in touch with the Samoan technical director at the time, who unfortunately was very helpful, but unfortunately just a bit busy to be able to do the Q&A in that time frame. So he passed my details on to a guy called Russ. First it was Alistair McRae, who is the head of recruitment for the Samoan national team and the federation. So he then said, look, I'm going to be joined by myself and obviously joined by a guy called Russ Gurr, who is his assistant, and he's a British guy. So we did a Q&A, put it onto the blog site, and it was massive. People really, really took off, and it's still now the highest viewed Q&A that I've done on that blog site. They spoke really well about themselves. They spoke really well about the program and what Samoa are doing. But that then, because it was so popular for that post, it just opened up a different network, like starting to realize people from the Pacific were looking at the article, and New Zealand, Australia, that whole side of the world. And that then connected me to different people in the region. And one of those guys was a guy called Shem Levi, who is the president of the Marshall Islands Soccer Federation. So yeah, a few chance emails, WhatsApps, voice notes, back and forth, and then it just spiraled from that point, really.
It's always the way, right? You meet someone who knows someone who knows someone, and then all of a sudden you're in a room you didn't expect to be in, right?
Definitely.
So how did he approach you? And what was the kind of proposal that he made? What was the sales pitch that he made to you for this project? Because it sounds incredibly exciting and this ability to build something, but how did they sell it to you? Did they have to sell it to you?
Nah, not at all. Honestly, it was the first part was really informal, because we were just messaging, and because of the time difference, it had to be that way, really, because they're 12 hours ahead in the Marshall Islands. So it was hard to then pinpoint a time where we could actually sit and chat on the phone for long, or Zoom, whatever it might have been. It was hard to tie down a time. So so it was very informal at first, and then I think the first real connection came from an article that I came across after I spoke to him. First, it was an article from the Athletic, and it was 2020, I believe, when the FA had just formed, and it was just all around the last nation on earth to be without a football team. So we started talking about that and how, why, what are they doing about it, and then that's what spiraled it on. So I was then asked to come up with a short, medium, long-term plan of how I could help and how I could connect it to my own style and philosophy. And then the next thing, I was offered the role as the technical director.
Wow, that's so. How would you describe your philosophy? What was the first kind of ideas that you wanted to kind of build into this plan?
For me, the good thing about it actually as well, it connects to what the board wanted to do from MISF, like the Marshall Islands Soccer Federation, and that was to work from children upwards. And it was quite clear early on that the children are the ones that are driving this project. They want to play. They're the ones that are telling parents, they're telling teachers, they want to play the game. But there's so little awareness and opportunity for them to do it, especially in like a structured environment, that it just doesn't really happen. And it does happen, but not on a regular or, like I said, structured basis. So that was the main aim for me. So the first part was, and is to develop it in schools. So I've created a school curriculum that's going to be rolled out across the country schools, and PE teachers will deliver that. But it's a case of training those teachers. So it's almost a case of that they know how to do it, but why they're doing it as well.
Okay.
And and then obviously it starts to build in from there into youth structures. So open access sessions, but also excellence pathways and talent development, talent ID programs, which then ultimately link into working from the top down with the national team as well. But there's such a massive US influence on the nation itself that because the game's naturally growing in the States, it's then also naturally growing in the Marshall Islands.
Okay.
So it's now is a great time to be on the back of the growth across the world, but also the growth in that region as well.
So are you having to compete with the likes of basketball, baseball, American football? Are they the kind of still the major sports over there?
Yeah, same again. There are structures to it compared to not being structures to it for football or soccer, but baseball and basketball are the main ones because you don't need a lot of space to play. You don't need a lot. You don't need a lot of players to play, and that's the main exposure that they've got to sport. In terms of, apart from individual sports where there is a lot of Olympic representation, for example, for the country, whereas football, yes, you can play it 1v1, 2v2, but in terms of if you play full scale 11v11, you need a pitch.
You need space.
You need space.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit harder to do that, but there are ways around it. There are places to play. There are parks to play. There are indoor venues that are currently available and also nearly completed. There's a national stadium that's nearly completed, which is going to be a huge base for us.
And again, with the US influence, to kind of go back to American Samoa a bit, because I feel like, as you said, it's a kind of similar case. In that documentary, they get a bit of support from the US Federation. They get coaches from the US Federation, like the Dutch guy who comes in and manages, right?
Thomas Rongen.
Exactly. A bit of a madman, right? But is that something that you could also look at? Could you turn to the US for help, or is it something that you're kind of a little bit on your own?
We haven't reached out yet, but it is definitely something that we will look into because there is a partnership, government-wise between the two nations. There is a large military base on one of the islands, one of the atolls in the Marshall Islands for the US. There's a free movement of people between the two nations. So, yeah, we will be contacting US Soccer at some point. But it's just a case of making sure that we have a better profile first of what we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then we've got a bit more of a backing to then go and approach people. And that's going to be the same when we approach OFC, for example, for confederation and membership. We could approach them now, but we want to be in a position where we've got a structure, we've got something that is our identity that we can then say, yeah, this is us. Can you help us develop it?
Nice. So we talked about the school curriculum as well as one of the first things you've got in there to be right, this is where we start. What are the boxes you need to tick to become part of OFC and then to become a part of FIFA? What are the differences? And I imagine the red tape must be ridiculous. How many loops are there to jump through?
There'll be definitely a lot of protocols, a lot of policies that we have to follow, a lot of things we need in place. I mean, the first step for us will be affiliate membership of OFC. So there are full members. So you look at Fiji, Samoa, Cook Islands, New Zealand, for example. All those nations, and obviously others, New Caledonia and stuff like this, they're all full members. But you also have affiliate members where Tuvalu, Kiribati, they have access to pots of funding from OFC, and support, but they don't get the full membership. They're not part of that wider provision. They have lesser funding, they have lesser support, but they also don't represent in terms of the mainstream OFC games as well. But that's where we want to be, because at the moment we don't have any of that. We don't have membership or anything, so we are solely relying on fundraising and sponsorship. So in terms of growing a game, if you have to try and grow a game without equipment, with no funding, it's quite difficult. So that's our first step, and that will be easier to achieve than full membership. But same again, we won't be contacting OFC just yet. We are wanting to get everything in place first so that we do have something that can almost run without the support if we need it to, until the support does come in at some point. But if we sit around and wait for membership of any sort, we could end up waiting for a long time and nothing would ever happen. So we want to be developing it first and then say, well, it's still running. Can you just help us grow it a little bit more? And we've had I've had some informal discussions with some different people at OFC.
Okay.
I've got some connections now that I didn't have before. So that's great. But it's a case of, making sure we've got the right offer first to go to them rather than waiting for them to sort of come to us as well.
Nice. So are the countries like Tuvalu and I think it's Kiribati you mentioned, right? Are you kind of trying to follow their model? Are there any countries you're taking inspiration from, or
there's similarities, definitely.
Any of them have given you a hand?
Yeah, there are similarities. I mean, like Tuvalu, for example, they have different islands, different bases, similar to us, and they run a football league which is similar to like a Gibraltar style in Europe, for example, where all the teams play out of one national stadium. So all league games are in one venue, which likelihood is that would be the case for us because the national stadium is going to be on the main capital island, Majuro. That would be like the main base and the main hub for it, which makes a lot more sense. So those sort of influences are massive. But there's also then taking the Marshallese culture and their approach to it. So they're very community based. They're very proud people. They're very this is who we are. We stick together. Feel to like the principles. So applying that into a playing philosophy for the national teams, put that into like a collective approach of how we structure anything is going to be massive. So I would say that there are things we take from neighbouring countries because it's regional in terms of similarities, but it's almost making sure that it's a national identity that's the first main point.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, you've got to have your own identity, right? That's the whole idea of it. Is you're forming your national team. It has to be yours, right? Yeah. But you're gonna, I suppose, as it goes on, you're gonna see like rivalries grow between the islands. Are there any islands that already you think that's going to be a derby? That's going to be the one that matters more than any others?
I think the early impressions are that there aren't really any specific rivalries, but I know exactly what you mean because, like people like Tuvalu, for example, they might not be full FIFA members, they might not be full OFC members, but they are in a position where we want to be. They're OFC members of some sort. They're affiliate members. We aren't. So that's realistically got to be your first point, hasn't it? Where they're in a place we want to be. So we have to go out and show a point. And they are very strong. They've played FIFA nations in friendlies and they're competitive. They are good. So for us, I think that's got to be the main one. But then if you look at other nations, you've got this, Samoa, you've got Fiji, Kiribati again. Those neighbouring countries have to be the first one, I think.
Nice. I like it. I like it. So we've talked about kind of go to the national team a little bit and how that works. Because as you said, it's based over several islands and there isn't much space for like a football pitch, right? How, in terms of like gathering a national team, how do the different islands provide logical like issues? And how do you solve them? Like, how do you have to do trials on each island? Is it open trials where people come to one place? How does it work?
At the moment, we're in early stages in terms of national teams. So, I've been writing like a playing identity and a principles of how we play and linking it to cultures and principles of the nation. So that's fine. But then in terms of recruitment, eligibility, just actually developing a team, we haven't really worked out a strategy for it yet, purely because we want to focus on the schools and the youth and stuff like this. But the loose conversations we have had so far are that, that would be the main situation, like you said, about trials and open events, because the more opportunities we put on for people to play, the more we're going to discover people that are talented. So if we create a league structure, then there's more teams, there's more players, there's more opportunity to see people play. But in terms of the smaller islands, the smaller atolls, there will be players at some point. We just got to make sure we find a way to do it. So whether that's a case of a smaller feel to the game, smaller base numbers, 3v3, 4v4, 6v6, whatever it might be. But you can still work out if a player is good enough from those technical elements and any form of football. So we can pick out people from that. But there are there is football at the moment. It plays. There's football that plays on Kwajalein, which is another one of the islands at the moment, one of the atolls, and that's where the base is, the US military base. So there are teams that play there. It's just a little bit more informal. It's not as structured as what we're aiming it to be. But yeah, people play. So it's a case of, you know, finding those talented players and just bringing them together. So whether that is a case of, same again, like talent ID, talent development programs that we'll do with youth players, we'll have to do that with senior players as well. And in longer term, like we said, there's a massive base and connection to the US. So there are 60,000 Marshallese citizens in the country, but there are 30,000 in in the Marshall Islands, but there are 30,000 just in one state in the US. So
right, okay,
you know, like Arkansas has 30,000 Marshallese citizens in there. So out of 30,000, you'd like to think there'd be 5, 10, 15, 20 people that play football. So it might be more. So you'd like to open that up as an idea. So eventually that could be that we have a hub there and we pull players across from there, but that's longer term.
Nice. So like naturalizing players, like obviously that is further down the road, but I'm not even sure how you do that process. Are you just looking for people that have the passport, looking for and I don't get how they discover players like that. You're just looking for populations within cities.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be very scout based, wasn't it? I mean, initially and very short and medium terms, we'll be looking at the players on the Marshall Islands onshore. But you know, when I was talking to the guys from Samoa, for example, that's what they've done. I think in the last year alone, in 2022, they created 80 something passports for players across the world that are Samoan, but never really thought they had the opportunity to represent their national team because they're spaced anywhere in the world. But it was a case of a talent pool, a scouting network that found these players. So we would have to have a similar approach to that at some point. If we were to look at like the US, for example, we would have to have US based scouts and recruiters that go out and watch players that are eligible. But also things like social media will be massive for that. And social media has been huge for us already. You know, we've connected to 50 plus countries already where people wanted to reach out to help us. And some of those people are Marshallese like descendants that in the States that play like college and high school football at the moment. So five years from now, they could be future national team players. You just don't know.
That is pretty exciting. Definitely. Also with the growth of the men's game, I imagine there's going to be a kind of simultaneous thing of the growth of the women's game, right? Trying to get women into football as well. There is that under your remit as well. Is that something that you're trying to do simultaneously?
We definitely have plans to develop the female game as well. Initially, it will be the male game, and the only reason is because that's what's currently playing. So we know that there are pockets and communities that play, and we know that there are females that want to play. It's just a case now of getting a structure, and then we'll start to focus on that as well. But yeah, that's a route that we want to look down as well. And especially if we start to then build it into schools and youth, we're opening those opportunities for girls to grow up and play the game. And it would just become second nature that's another sport that they have access to, like they rightly should be across the world, and it is developing across the world. And that's where we want to be part of as well. We want to grow that female game too.
Nice. And in the future, you do have planned, you're going to be hosting the Micronesian Games, right? So this is part of the national stadium being built, which is, I think it's a 2,000-seater stadium, right? That's going to be built on the main island. Does it help to have that deadline of right, we need to be ready by that point, or is it quite scary to have that deadline?
So the fantastic thing about it is that we are going to host the Micronesian Games this year. The unfortunate thing about it is that there is no football on this year's program. So it works well in and against us, I guess, because the good thing about it is that we don't have to rush to be ready for something. But at the same time, it's still a good opportunity to connect with these different nations that do have football programs, some of which are like FIFA nations. So Guam, for example, where we can ask questions, we can hopefully draw some more support from that, and longer term, hopefully be part of these Micronesian Games when it does have football back on the program. But like this year, for example, it's athletics, basketball,
Mm-hmm.
volleyball. We've got things like the obvious like swimming, but then things like weightlifting, wrestling are massive in the Marsh Islands and also the region. So they're on the program as well. But unfortunately, no football this year.
Maybe next time. Maybe next time. By next time there will be, I'm sure. Nice. So also, you kind of touched on the league system a little bit and said there is a bit of there's a league that goes on there. I just saw, now this is from Wikipedia, so I'm not sure how reliable it is, but it did say that the football season has just finished there. This must be part of your plan as well to get that structured league in. How many teams do you think the island could sustain, and what is the end goal for the league structure?
Early discussions have been that we'd have like 8 to 10 teams that would play out at the national stadium. But then we've also had other ideas where if that's the case that they're playing on Majuro and there are teams that are already playing on Kwajalein, do we then have like regional championships almost, that then the winners play against each other as like the title decider at the end of the season? So there are a couple of different routes that we could go down. They would be the predominant 2 islands, atolls that would host games because, like I said, Kwajalein already does, Majuro will. But yeah, there's a couple of different routes that we can go down. It's just a case of working out which one would be probably a little bit more suitable logistically, but also in reality as well. Yeah.
Nice. It's like kind of like the AFC East, AFC West kind of Super Bowl type thing, right?
Almost, yeah, definitely. It's that case, isn't it? We could almost have it because I think it's about 45 minutes between the 2 flight time. So you're talking a couple of hours on a boat. So to get players to go across to play league games would be difficult and probably not fair on a regular basis. It wouldn't be possible, legit, like financially, really. So if we were to host it all on Majuro, brilliant. But if we were to host it 2 separate ones, and there's only one time in the season where they play across the one game sort of title decider, then that's more doable.
Nice. And then I applied for a job in the Marshall Islands a long time ago as an English teacher. So I'm an English teacher and I applied out there. Unfortunately, never heard back. Like in another life, I'm out there now. But I realized in the research for that job that it is very logistically difficult to get to and back from.
Yeah.
So have you been there yourself yet? Are you planning to go over? How do you do this job remotely?
So I've only been in post since just before Christmas, and in terms of actual like work that I've submitted, like the school curriculum, for example, and the social media, driving connections, and media and stuff like this. This is easy to do remotely, but because it is quite new and quite fresh now, I haven't been out there. But also, like you said, I think it's around 30 hours to get there, and there's only 2 realistic routes that you can get to from here, from the UK. So one is via Hawaii, so you get to Hawaii and then across. The other option is to go to Australia and Brisbane and then across. So either way, it's about the same distance.
So long.
It's a long time, and it's also very expensive. I mean, you're looking at about £2,000 just for flights. Wow. So without funding and membership to OFC or FIFA, that becomes even harder. So same again, it comes down to fundraising and sponsorship. And I'll go out at some point this year. We've penciled in like July, for example, which like around games wise, but also I'd like to go out sooner because we have a need to upskill people. With the PE teachers obviously being trained, but also we have locals that want to be coaches. So informal coach education is going to be massive. So to be part of that process based on, like, if it's my structures that are going to be the main basis or a big heavily influenced basis of this, I'd like to be the one that's on the ground delivering that to the people, to the locals. So I'd like to get out sooner than July, but it will realistically come down to what funding is available and sponsorships available in place by those points.
Nice. So there are currently people out there who are trying to kind of, like, I suppose the federation themselves are trying to instill what you're telling them, and you've got some, they had some coaches out there that can start the process, right?
Yeah. So like the board members, for example, they would be the guys that are driving it. And the FA president himself is a football fan. He's played like college level in the States, and actually, I'll tell a lie. I believe it was the British Virgin Islands, but still like a good structure to it. Then you've also got members of the board who are from the Solomon Islands, and same again, massive football fans. So those guys would then help to drive it initially and help to train the teachers on the ground based on work that we've sort of cooperatively done. But to be a person, to be able to go out there in person and help deliver that would be fantastic.
I can only imagine what it's like out there. I was looking at the pictures. It looks genuinely beautiful. It looks like kind of one of those like postcard kind of resort kind of thing. It looks incredible.
Very picturesque.
So when you get out there and you've finally got your kind of feet on the ground out there and you've got your first game, what do you expect? How do you think it will feel? And do you have any clue of who your first opponent could be?
No, unfortunately not at this stage. I think we've randomly had like messages from people all across the world. Like we've had Sunday League teams from the UK saying,
I can imagine.
We'll go down in history. We'll play your first game, and it's like what? And then we've had all sorts of people contact us from all over the world saying they want to be part of the first games, and we've had kit collectors saying they want to buy the first kits. We've had kits. Suppliers and manufacturers saying they want to provide those first kits. It's been unbelievable. We've had people that want to be the national team head coaches, analysts, recruitment, honestly, all sorts. Like it's unbelievable and really quite humbling in terms of the response that we've had in such a short time, because it's only, what are we? I think it's day 10 today since social media went live.
Wow. Right.
And in 10 days, we've got up to about 1,500 followers on Twitter, nearly £600 in donations, people reaching out, want to be kit suppliers, like donating kit and equipment. It's obviously media that's been fantastic across the world. Like it's unbelievable, the opportunities we've had so far to network and raise awareness to the game, but also the country as well.
Nice. Well, you'll have to message me when those kits come out, because I do want to add one to the collection. It could be hanging back here somewhere, definitely. For a few of the episodes.
Keep posting on social media, because over time there will be more developments.
Beautiful. And you kind of talked there about kind of people getting in touch. Are you trying to like build a team of people around you, like in terms of like you talked about scouts, and when the game comes, are you going to be the manager? Are you looking for a manager? Like, are you starting to try and look at a team you can build?
Personally, I think, especially medium long term, we will have head coaches in place and the coaching staff. In the short term, I guess it will come down to logistics, because like we just said, getting there and financially and logistically is difficult. So if we need to get 5-6 people out, that is more difficult than getting 1 or 2 people out.
Yeah.
So it might be that in the short term, I double up and I do both roles, like a technical director and head coach. But also, longer term, medium term, I would prefer to just be the technical director in that position and rather have head coaches that are in place and have those specific different roles, because I think you need that difference, but completely understandable in logistically that it might not be achievable in the short term just because of the finances and available. But in terms of we want to make it as professional as we can. We want those backroom staff, we want analysts, we want the medical staff, we want the opposition scouts. We want that basis, we want that proper environment.
Nice. So please just tell us where, if for our listeners, if they want to donate to the GoFundMe, if they want to support the campaign, where can they find you? Where can they kind of slip a bit of money your way?
We do have a GoFundMe page. The links are available on all those social media platforms. So social media on Twitter is @SoccerFedMI. On Instagram, it is @Lowa, which is LOWA_soccer. And the reason for that is in like Marshallese Polynesian history and mythology, Loa is like the god who created all these different things. So he created the sea, he created grass, he created the sky. So in our theory, it was we created soccer. He brought it to the islands. And then on Facebook is and LinkedIn as well, Marshall Islands Soccer Federation. And the GoFundMe page is on there as well. So people can, fortunately and massively appreciated, that they can donate.
Beautiful. We'll put the GoFundMe page in the link in the description below this video as well, so they can find it nice and easily. Lloyd, I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much. We are going to have you on again in the future so you can give us an update on how it's going.
Yeah, please do.
But thanks again for coming on. And viewers, listeners, don't forget, hit the like and subscribe button. And we will see you next time.
Fantastic.
Cheers,
Thank you for your
man.
time.